Thank you, Chairman. And for all of you, I'm quite certain that there's going to be plenty of demand for both projects. There's going to be more demand than there is electricity, so keep them all going as long as you can. I'm going to start with you, Ms. Verler. But by the way, all of you are great. It was really fascinating to listen, at least for nerds like us. It's fascinating to listen to all of your stories and anecdotes. But Ms. Verler, your insight's been really helpful to my team, as I mentioned earlier, and I thank you for that. And I see why you're so valuable to them. You provided some really instructive background, and I love the illustration of the sink and the two sides. But with regard to that water supply rule, from a legal standpoint, and again, you talked about Congress and the courts a little bit, but maybe dig down just a little bit more for me on the legal objections to the supply rule in the first place, because I think history is instructive. I'm glad we got it withdrawn. I'd love to make it permanent for everybody, ultimately, but maybe give a little legal analysis as why it was so objectionable.
Thank you for the question. So basically, by the Corps trying to usurp control over all of that water and, the entire kitchen sink, that takes away the state's ability to allocate the water in accordance with their state laws. So every state allocates their laws or allocates their water somewhat differently. Arizona's a little bit different than North Dakota, but generally we all use the prior appropriation system in the West. And so there are already mechanisms set up in place to allocate water between users, especially in times of shortage. And when the Corps comes in and tries to, take control over the whole sink, that really takes away the state's ability to do any sort of regulation, and that is contrary to state law.
Maybe even the Constitution.
And the Constitution.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about the Western Water Cooperative Committee, which again, the Corps wasn't crazy about us doing. I mean, their sense was that we can work with attorneys generals and we can work with governors in individual states. But tell me how you see the new committee working and why it might work better in getting better cooperation with the Corps.
I see it working so the committee appoints, there's one person appointed by the governor and one person appointed by the attorney general from each of the states, and those are supposed to be people who actually have technical expertise. These aren't meant to be political appointments, but people who are actually going to be able to dig down into the weeds with the Corps of Engineers staffers and discuss the problems and kind of try to find solutions. And also they are required to report to Congress every year after we have the meeting about whatever it is that the committee talks about. So, I expect it to be focused a lot on water supply issues, but there's no language in the bill that says it has to focus on water supply issues. So I think we can maybe broaden out from that and, see where there's conflict.
I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to being in the middle of that, quite honestly. So thank you for your work on that. Okay, Dr. Travnik. Thanks for your work on the Snake Creek embankment and for understanding my illustration. Dig down a little bit more for me on what an EA should include in terms of information. Now, fortunately, the General Spellman's lifted the time, provided more time for comment. It's kind of fun. I mean, this is how it works in North Dakota. I text the governor calls Andrea, and pretty soon we're getting them more information. And fortunately, what they ignored the first go-around, they're now asking for in the second go-around. Tell us a little bit about that additional information that is, by the way, in their charter, right?
Right. So, Senator Cramer, thank you for that question. Yeah, as we're looking at the Snake Creek embankment and the economic analysis that goes with it, right now the Corps is looking at the economic analysis just from the dam safety perspective, so the loss of life. But I had mentioned in the testimony that there's multiple purposes associated with this embankment. So looking at it from that water supply perspective, recreation, fish and wildlife perspective, and that's why we had the concerns. That's why we reached out to you and the governor's office looking for that extension. So we had requested seeing the data that was associated with the economic analysis and what that looked like. And we did have to sign an NDA associated with the extra information, but my team was able to dive in, working with Garrison Diversion Conservancy District as well, what those numbers are. And we feel that if there was an opportunity to make sure that we're looking at this from a multiple purpose perspective versus just the dam safety, loss of life perspective, that we would be above that 1.0 that's needed for the benefit cost ratio to move forward with a structural fix versus an operational fix.
Dr. Travnik, I wanted to talk a little more about the other factors that should be in an economic analysis. But your discussion with Governor Ricketts remind me that there is nothing more feared by the Corps of Engineers than a governor who becomes a senator and gets on the EPW committee. And because governors always have all of this experience and pent-up frustration that they want to take out on them. However, I thought the discussion was great because I think both Jennifer and Andrea gave the answer, but the Corps still didn't seem to be hearing our voice in the mandate. No, you have to consider these other things. However, and this is where hope lies in my view, the cooperative committee, the Western Water Cooperative Committee, where governors and attorneys general appoint these people. The reason the Corps leadership didn't want to do it is because they like talking to each governor one at a time, or each, their staff level discussions one at a time. But as a group, the West together, and strong bipartisan, as we notice in this room, while aren't identical, we have similar concerns. And that's why we created this committee that will answer both to the Corps and then to Congress, so that we will be able to be kept up to date on how they're responding, so that we can hopefully make it crystal clear, Dr. Travnik, that they're either meeting or not meeting. Now, I'm going to be hopeful because I'm a hopeful person. I agree with several of the witnesses that say we've got, right now, pretty good leadership. I think we do at the Corps. I have great respect for General Spellman. I have great respect for Secretary Mike, I call him. Anyway, and I just think I'm going to be hopeful, okay? I think Secretary Connor, having been involved in other agencies, Interior, understanding the role of states and the federal government and natural resource management, I'm going to be hopeful. But we'll reserve the tough ones for you, Governor. But maybe, Doctor, if just expand a little bit more, because one of the things, having been an economic development director, the role of water, obviously irrigation is critical. Obviously municipal use, really a big deal. Both big economic drivers that should be considered as part of any analysis. But beyond that, there's the whole role of industrial development, and it's hard to measure what would have been possible had we had the water where we needed the water. For example, I think of all of the projects that have probably gone by the wayside because we didn't have adequate water. Can that be part of the analysis? I want to have integrity, but can that be part of it if you can document projects that are either in the docket or in the queue or lost opportunities if there was just a better supply?
Thanks for the question. That would be our hope, right? So we're hopeful as well, some of the discussions related to that, knowing that the water supply projects that we've been working on, knowing that we've had authorization from 1965 in order to use the McCluskey Canal, in order to get water out east to the Fargo region, to the Grand Forks region. So trying to get water out east is for 50% of the population in North Dakota. So we've been trying to move forward with those projects. So it's been in the works a long time, so we hope that they would take that into account for the economic analysis.
Yeah. Well, great. Anything you'd add to that, Jennifer, in terms of are we hopeful about the leadership of the Corps right now and that they're maybe going to listen a little better?
Yes, Senator, I'm always hopeful that leadership at the Corps will be helpful to us, and I would echo your comments about General Spellman. He's been very good to work with, been helpful in listening to the state's prerogative.
Well, and my observation, and of course, again, I looked at Governor Ricketts because he's got so much experience with the Omaha office. I mean, I think over the generations of leadership, we can always get along with Omaha. It's when it gets to, Oregon or Washington, it gets more complicated. So, all right, that's enough from me. I'm grateful to all of you. I think your testimony has been great, and And I love ending on a note of optimism.